Welcome back. In this particular slideshow, we're going to be discussing the oral societies. These societies were the foundation for millennia. They were often tragically hunted and exterminated by dominant cultures, as we saw in the conquest of Latin America or in the own arrival of Europeans to the North American continent. Today, they're often being absorbed into nation states and often forced to disappear by the pressures of society around them, whether it be drug traffickers or well-intentioned but misguided national governments. However, they still do continue to exist by the thousands and can illustrate our understanding of ourselves and of our origins, and for that reason, they should be studied. Now, we're talking about bands, clans, and tribes, small groups of people that are often limited in size. They might number a few dozen individuals at most. Sometimes they may number a few thousand. They're often limited in geography to a specific area, often delineated by rivers or by savannas or by deserts or something like that. Often they exist in isolated regions that have not yet been penetrated by the predominant cultures or by other persons to search for wealth in those regions. They do exist by the thousands, as I have said, in some places, and so they still are a force to be existed with in the sense of cultural reality. They're primarily oral and holistic in orientation. They share their stories by word of mouth, and they look for the whole of mankind, not just specifically one aspect of it. And they seek to live in harmony with the nature around them as they depend upon nature for their food, for their clothing, for their shelter. They see life in all things, both animate and inanimate. And this leads us to their spiritual beliefs. They see little distinction between the spirit world and the material world, and they interact on a regular basis with each aspect of that reality, a fact that is a reality for them. They interact with the living and dead. They will speak to the dead relatives exactly like they may speak to the living, and they will expect things from the dead relatives as well as they expect things from the living relatives. They'll speak to the spirit world, and they will see the spirit world in material objects as well, both animate and inanimate. They might see a spirit existence in a canoe that they take down the river, and so they ask for safe transit. They might see spirits living in a tree which doesn't move, or a rock or a pinnacle or something of that nature. And their entire existence is focused on negotiating with the forces that be in an effect to maintain harmony and well-being. They are, in a very real sense, human-centered in every way, shape, or form. Now you might say, hey, wait a minute, we're all human-centered, but are we? In a human-centered culture, the person is primary and everything else is secondary. That's not the case in our own society. I can give you a very simple example. We live by the clock. If you're expected to be somewhere at a specific time, say 8 o'clock in the morning, and you show up at 8:10, you're late. And an explanation and an excuse and a asking for pardon is expected. Now, if you were in a human-centered society, that would not be the case. It would be presumed that something must have happened, that maybe you bumped into a friend and you couldn't pass a friend without saying hi and chatting a little bit. Maybe you were not feeling well that morning and it took you a little bit longer to get up. Maybe your cooking pot broke and you couldn't fix breakfast or something of that nature. And so the person and the relationship with that person is far more important than inanimate objects or immaterial objects such as time and material possessions. These societies give great personal freedom. There's virtually no law to tell you what you can do and what you can't do. And yet at the same time there's human orientation, because you see, you know that your existence depends on the well-being of that group. And so if you don't contribute to the well-being of that group, you not only destroy the group, you destroy yourself as well. Fertility is a central focus as well. We'd look at that on a rather prurient manner. We would say, well, they were pornographic in what they did and what they drew and what they depicted. It's certainly shocking if you go into one of these cultures and the men are running around wearing a penis sheath, a gourd which they tie up to their belly, giving them the impression of having a rather large and permanent erection. And yet it is not the sexuality that's the focus, it is the fertility. Because you see, if babies are not being born, the group will not continue to exist. If there are not young people, there is no one to take care of the old people who can no longer take care of themselves. And so it is the fertility, the focus, the sustenance of the group, and not the sexuality that is central. Space and time are relative then to the individual. It's where he or she is and how what is around them affects that person. And it's the person that's important, and space and time are then adapted to individual needs. And that's why life events are central and not the clock time that we use here in America. All well-being is then negotiated. It has to be negotiated to sustain a well-being in life. This necessitates an oral transmission of myth because, as I said, once it's written down, that brings a solid, immovable nature to it. But when everything is oral, everything can be slowly morphed into something else as situations change and as the world changes around us. Magic is a tool chest used by the elders or the keepers of the tradition. We've often spoken as of witch doctors in a very negative manner, but yet magic is something used to enforce the good of the group. And so something bad happens to somebody, maybe that person has done something to harm the group. And so the elders are trying to keep harmony by bringing pressure upon that group and showing them how their actions have been negative. So the individual and the group are mutually beneficial, and all action is taken upon that basis. Myths and heroes set these parameters, and we can even use these myths and heroes then in finding parallels with the gospel and with the Old Testament stories and share the good news with them, because it is the gospel, it is Jesus Christ that will give them the ability to confront the changing reality of the world in which they live, so that they can move forward in a successful manner in what's becoming an increasingly complicated and difficult world. We should deal with these people with love and mutual respect and acceptation, not looking down upon them, but seeing them as partners of ours in this walk that we call life.